Take one look at this guy and you'd probably think, yep, nothing going on behind those eyes. Looks like the kind of dude who spent his whole life carrying logs and scratching his head. Not exactly genius material.
The hell did you just say?
I was kidding. I'm sorry, you're a handsome guy, my bad. Turns out, almost everything you think you know about Neanderthals is completely wrong. They weren't the dumb cavemen we've been making fun of for decades. In fact, their brains were bigger than yours, bigger than every single human alive today. And somehow, that's not even the craziest part. Because once you see the mysterious structure they built more than 1,000 feet underground, in complete darkness, you'll realize you've probably believed one of the 6 biggest myths about Neanderthals this whole time. But here's the thing. Having a bigger brain doesn't automatically make you smarter. What really matters is what you do with it. And one of the best pieces of evidence comes from a Neanderthal known as the Shanidar man. Just picture this for a second. You're blind, you've lost an arm, and you're trying to survive in the wild, 40,000 years ago. Under those conditions, most people wouldn't expect you to last more than a day or two, right? But somehow, this man lived well into his 40s. And that tells us something incredible. Neanderthals weren't clueless at all. They had organized social groups, sophisticated tools built for surviving the wilderness, and they even knew how to preserve food by smoking it. But here's what really surprised scientists. They also understood medicine. Paleontologists have even found traces of anti-inflammatory and antibiotic-producing plants trapped in Neanderthal teeth. Yep, they really did know a thing or two about medicine. Now, I wouldn't trust one of them to perform open heart surgery or anything, but they clearly understood the basics. Which brings us back to the real question. How does a blind man with one arm survive in the wild for more than 40 years? 40,000 years ago? Simple. He didn't survive alone. He had an entire community looking after him. Neanderthals survived for nearly 400,000 years. That's about 100,000 years longer than our own species has existed. So they must have been doing something right, even if most people never hear about it. But here's an even bigger surprise. That image of Neanderthals I've been showing you this whole time, it probably doesn't look anything like what they actually looked like.
NANI?!
And the reason that image got stuck in all of our heads is actually kind of embarrassing. It all goes back to a French paleontologist named Marcelin Boulay. In 1911, he reconstructed the very first nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton ever discovered. Before that, scientists had found nothing more than a few scattered bones. So honestly, you can't really blame the guy for ending up with a reconstruction that looked like that. There was just one problem. Boulay had nothing else to compare it to, so he had no way of knowing the skeleton he was studying belonged to an elderly Neanderthal with severe arthritis. And that's the thing about first impressions. They stick. One 70-year-old man with advanced arthritis ended up convincing the world that an entire human species walked around hunched over like apes. Because of that single disease skeleton, the public's image of Neanderthals stayed completely wrong for more than a century. The average Neanderthal probably didn't look anything like that. Honestly, if you ran into one today, you'd probably just think, that guy's not exactly winning any beauty contests.
NANI?!
So yeah, all we really needed was a better mental picture. But there's another myth we need to get rid of. If you're imagining Neanderthals as these prehistoric, steroid-looking muscle monsters, that's wrong too. Their stocky build did make them stronger than us pound for pound. But it also came with a downside. Long-distance running would have been absolutely brutal for them. And endurance running is exactly what turned our ancestors into such incredible hunters. So think of it this way. Neanderthals would have crushed you in the weight room, but don't expect them to win a marathon. Now take a look at this. These are the talons of a white-tailed eagle, dating back around 130,000 years. Look closely, and you'll notice tiny, incredibly precise cuts carved into the talon, small enough to thread a string through. In other words, someone turned this eagle claw into a necklace. So who made it? Not us. At that point, Homo sapiens hadn't even set foot in Europe yet. This necklace belonged to a Neanderthal. And before you think, okay, so they made a necklace, big deal. Hold that thought. This is a much bigger deal than it sounds. Making something like this takes patience, steady hands, and most importantly, the desire to create it in the first place. You have to look at an eagle talon and think, you know who'd love this? My girlfriend. Or maybe, this would make an amazing gift. That's real abstract thinking. That's genuine creativity. When you think about it, it's kind of hilarious. A species that went extinct 40,000 years ago had more creativity than a lot of people with AI today. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Anyway, back to the good stuff. That necklace was only the beginning. Inside a cave in France, paleontologists also discovered a series of rough sketches that looked just like the random doodles we all used to draw in the margins of our school notebooks. Pretty cool, right? But compared to what scientists found inside Brunico Cave, that necklace was nothing. The site wasn't carefully studied until 2016. And here's the crazy part. What they found wasn't anywhere near the cave entrance. It was hidden more than 300 meters deep inside the cave. And if you're wondering what it was like in there, just imagine being surrounded by complete darkness. There wasn't a single trace of natural light down there. Which means whoever built this structure had to carry fire just to see where they were going. Then they walked more than 1,000 feet through total darkness before carefully breaking off more than 400 stalagmites and arranging them into giant circles on the cave floor. Why they built it is still a mystery. The cave is far too deep to have been a shelter, so it may have been used for some kind of ritual or spiritual purpose. But here's the part I really want you to remember. Just because we keep finding Neanderthal remains inside caves doesn't mean they were true cave people. That's just classic sampling bias. The only things with any chance of surviving for thousands of years are the ones protected from rain, wind, sunlight, and everything else that slowly destroys them. That's why we keep finding so many of their artifacts inside caves. But if Neanderthals were really that intelligent, where are they now? Why don't we see Neanderthals driving around like everyone else? The story most people have heard is that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were bitter enemies, fighting each other until one species finally won. But the truth isn't quite that simple, because what really happened to the Neanderthals was far more terrifying than most people realize. But first, there's something important you need to know. Neanderthals didn't just live in Europe. Their territory stretched from Western Europe all the way to Siberia, meaning they were spread across an enormous part of the world. And when a species is that widespread, it takes a whole chain of events, not just one, to wipe them out completely. That's why most paleoanthropologists now believe the Neanderthals weren't wiped out by a single cause, but by a perfect storm of disasters. Climate change disrupted the animals they hunted, forcing entire groups out of the territories they'd known for generations. And right in the middle of all that, our own species showed up. But the deadliest thing we may have brought with us wasn't better weapons. It was something far more invisible. Diseases their immune systems had never encountered before. Think of it like what happened when Europeans arrived in the Americas thousands of years later. But what may have truly sealed the Neanderthals' fate was something even simpler. In many ways, they were like the introverts of the human family. They lived in smaller groups and had fewer children, which meant that every time disaster struck, their populations recovered far more slowly than ours. Come to think of it, I'm an introvert too, so maybe I've got a little Neanderthal in me. And honestly, that's not even a crazy idea, because now we get to the biggest problem with the whole humans wiped out the Neanderthals story. The truth is, Neanderthals never completely disappeared. Go take a look in the mirror. The Neanderthal you've been looking for this whole time might actually be staring right back at you. Okay, I'm kidding.
Bruh.
Sort of. But the reason I said that is because Homo sapiens and Neanderthals really did have children together. Depending on where your ancestors came from, there's a good chance that a noticeable chunk of your DNA came from Neanderthals. In some parts of the world, that number can be as high as 4%. For a species that's supposedly been extinct for 40,000 years, that's a pretty impressive way to stick around. In fact, anthropologists have found that if your ancestry comes from any of these continents, there's a very good chance you carry at least a little Neanderthal DNA. Europe, Asia, North America, South America, and Oceania. Wait a second. That's basically almost the entire planet. The only continent where Neanderthal DNA is almost completely absent is Africa. The leading idea is that when our ancestors left humanity's original homeland and spread across the world, those migrating Homo sapiens met and had children with Neanderthals. The people who stayed in Africa didn't. But even that story is starting to change. A fairly recent study found traces of Neanderthal DNA in African populations as well, which means Neanderthals ended up leaving their mark almost everywhere. The only exception is a small region in West Africa, where scientists have found the populations with the highest proportion of what we'd call relatively unmixed Homo sapiens DNA. As for pretty much everyone else, there's a good chance your family tree includes a Neanderthal somewhere along the line. And once you understand what Neanderthals really were, that makes perfect sense. They weren't some primitive version of humans that got left behind. Evolution isn't a straight line from cavemen to modern people. It's much more like a tree, with different branches splitting off in different directions, each adapting to its own environment. Neanderthals were simply another branch of the human family, one that just happened to evolve for a completely different world than ours. So stop thinking of them as our ancient ancestors. They were more like our cousins. Although, judging by the DNA, some of our ancestors got a little closer than just cousins. And speaking of that, did you know Neanderthals weren't even the only human species alive at the same time as us? Like I mentioned earlier, old textbooks and pop culture have given us a pretty misleading picture of human evolution. It wasn't a single line of one species replacing another. For a long stretch of history, several different human species were alive at the same time as Homo sapiens. Neanderthals were just one of the most recent. There was also Homo naledi, which lived alongside our own species beginning around 300,000 years ago. Homo floresiensis was still around about 60,000 years ago and became famous for its tiny size. Then there were the Denisovans, who looked somewhat like Neanderthals but likely had slightly darker skin, and they were still around as recently as about 25,000 years ago. And we're still not done. There was Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, and even some of the last surviving populations of Homo erectus may have held on until roughly 100,000 years ago. For most of human history, we were never alone. The world was once shared by several different human species. Today, they're all gone, and only we remain. But surviving doesn't automatically make us the species that deserve to survive. Neanderthals built mysterious structures, crafted jewelry, knew a thing or two about medicine, and their DNA is still flowing through your veins right now. So the next time someone calls you a Neanderthal, just take it as a compliment. And that's the story of the Neanderthals. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more surprising stories about human history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.